The 1992 classic A League of Their Own is indisputably one of the all-time greats. It's incredibly rewatchable, never really gets old, is unapologetically earnest and heartwarming and nostalgic in all the right ways, and in case it's not clear already, it's one of my personal favorites, too. Now, controversial take, I know there are a lot of greats out there, but in my opinion, A League of Their Own may just be the best baseball movie of all time. But like any film about a sport, it's not solely or even primarily about baseball. Ever since I first saw this film as a t-ball playing kid, and even through countless rewatches into adulthood, I've always felt there was something enigmatic about its effect on me. It has a pretty bittersweet effect, almost equal parts uplifting and almost sorrowful. And sure, some of that comes with the sheer weight of its nostalgia, but it's also carried by the film's own protagonist, Dottie Hinson, the Queen of Diamonds, who only ever played one season. It can be hard to really understand this focal character, what motivates her decisions, why she changes her mind back and forth, what exactly she wants and if she gets it or not, and for a relatively straightforward film, that's a pretty unusual effect. This video will unpack what A League of Their Own is really all about through a close analysis of its focal character. Please remember to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Spoilers ahead for the entire film, of course, and as a quick refresher, if it's been a while, A League of Their Own is a fictionalized retelling of the inaugural year of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, set up by a 1988 framed narrative as Dottie Hinson travels to Cooperstown for a reunion exhibition game before launching into a flashback to 1943 that comprises most of the film. Dottie and her younger sister Kit are scouted to try out for a women's baseball league to keep the industry running while men are at war. After some persuasion from the much keener Kit, together they travel to Chicago, meeting second baseman Marla Hooch along the way, and eventually join the Rockford Peaches, coached by a washed-up former legend, Jimmy Dugan. There's a great ensemble cast bulking up the background of the film, including Madonna and Rosie O'Donnell, and the whole team comes together against very PG presentations of misogyny, wartime economics, and a general public disinterest in women's sports, fighting to keep the league alive through it all. It's historical fiction, sure, but we focus largely on the increasingly tense sibling rivalry between Dottie, who becomes an immediate star, but at least claims to care more about eventually starting a family with her husband who's at war, and Kit, who lives and dies by baseball, but feels stifled in her sister's shadow as she has been her whole life. The film ends with a famous base-running showdown before zooming back to the 80s, where we see all our favorite Peaches revisit their glory days. It's a funny, vibrant, energetic film that absolutely nails some of the genuine emotional beats, using incredible storytelling efficiency to demonstrate the power of female solidarity, the heartbreak of sudden loss, and the joy of discovering your meaning, all while spotlighting America's pastime and a theretofore underappreciated slice of history. This video will review why baseball in particular works so well for A League of Their Own and for storytelling in general, before focusing on what Dottie's journey tells us about the core meaning of the film, and then looking at a few memorable supporting characters. But before we jump in, I want to say a quick word about my paid partner, BetterHelp. So, A League of Their Own is, in my opinion, the ultimate baseball film, but it's about a lot more than a sport. Like all great stories, the film we're looking at today is about relationships. We have romantic partners, friends, teammates, mentors, and of course, the iconic sisters Dottie and Kit. Great art like A League of Their Own investigates these relationships because they matter so much to us. Relationships shape and inform our lives, but as we'll see in this film, they also come with all kinds of thorny questions that can be super tricky to navigate. I know when I think about relationships of any kind, I sometimes wonder how to take the right lessons from past relationships, why it can be hard to adapt to new ones, or how to communicate both honestly and effectively. Like all great things in life, relationships aren't easy, but you don't need to sort through all the toughest questions you might have on your own. My paid partner, BetterHelp, will connect you with a therapist who can help you ask the right questions and find meaningful answers. You'll get matched with a qualified therapist based on a quick questionnaire. You can switch therapists anytime, ensuring you find the right fit, and they have a customer support team ready for any questions along the way. Whether it's romance, friendships, or family, taking the step of seeking therapy to take care of yourself and others in your relationships is a huge sign of strength and could make a tangible difference in your life. To get 10% off your first month of therapy, use the special link in my description or go to betterhelp.com/JRR Talkin'. Thank you, BetterHelp, for supporting this video, and thank you to everyone who likes, subscribes, and leaves comments here. It all helps the channel grow, and I really appreciate it.
It is only a game, Jimmy. It's only a game.
Baseball is what gets inside you. It's what lights you up. You can't deny that.
Sports and storytelling really go hand in hand. Any sport can serve as a platform for narratives, but any match of a sport is a narrative in and of itself, and all it takes is careful writing and editing to tease out the undercurrent character, plot, and meaning there. Patrick H. Willems has a wonderful video linked in description on why baseball in particular lends itself to cinema. You should absolutely check it out. He aptly describes the game of baseball as a set of duels, akin to any action sequence in film. He recognizes that, unlike many other field sports, baseball has firmly delineated and instantly recognizable defensive positions and consistently clear objectives, meaning that as long as you have a very basic understanding of the game, you can tell exactly what's going on just from a very quick visual of gameplay. It's a great video, not least in part because he's clear that he himself has no personal connection to the game. So as he argues that baseball is the best sport for cinema, it's a completely unbiased stance. So here, without repeating too much from that great video, I'll expand on a few other reasons why baseball works so well for storytelling from what is absolutely and unapologetically a very biased view. Baseball has always been a deeply significant part of my life as a fan, as someone who still plays softball, and as someone who grew up with Joe Castiglione's voice seemingly always in the background. I can't not be romantic about baseball. And that's not a unique sentiment, right? Baseball, like a league of their own itself, is an inherently nostalgic sport. Particularly in the States, baseball is associated with an overly idealized version of the past, and its journey through the decades of American history is an incredible metric of social and political history. Even now, with all these attempts to modernize and digitize the industry, baseball remains an intrinsically analog game, built on mythic resonance, geometric balance, and the spirit of hope. Though baseball is a big stadium sport where things like grand slams and perfect games get the headlines, in its build, baseball is truly a game of millimeters and micro decisions. It comes down to such small minutia that it feels like there's always room for a little magic. In baseball, any team can beat any other team on any given day, and that's absolutely crucial for great storytelling. Sure, underdogs can win in any sport, of course, but the spirit of hope is rather uniquely sewn into the rules and physics of the game of baseball. Athleticism matters, yes, but this is a game more about fundamentals than about brute strength, and anyone can have the perfect swing at just the right angle. And the winning team can't just idle around running down the clock. There is no buzzer. You have to play out every inning of every game. Baseball is a fantastic container for character stories because it's an intensely mental game. It's a team sport, but when you walk up to the plate, when you deliver a pitch, when the ball's hit to you, in that moment, you are monumentally alone. And in batting, if you fail 2/3 of the time, statistically, you're actually doing all right. So it's a game that requires fortitude, patience, and some wisdom, and all of that permeates the tone and mystique of the game in cultural memory. For storytelling purposes, this makes baseball all the easier to work with. You can very easily maneuver individualized arcs within ensemble builds. And while I wish there were even more of that in the film, A League of Their Own does a solid job of using montages in particular to involve mini stories for some of the background characters. For example, Evelyn is famously yelled at by Jimmy after she screws up a cutoff throw. We see her struggle with her throwing accuracy again later on, but she finally nails it at a crucial juncture in the World Series, demonstrating her own growth and Jimmy's improvement as a coach. Now, the duel between pitcher and batter is rightly famous, but one of the greatest relationships in any sport of any time is that of pitcher and catcher. So when you're in the field, the pitcher controls the game, of course, but the catcher controls the pitcher. And it's more than just calling pitches as technical tactics against a given batter. It's also an intimate read on the pitcher themselves. What's working, what's not. The whole dynamic between the two is an exercise in understanding and trust. So situating Kit and Dottie as not just teammates, but as a pitcher-catcher duo is a brilliant way to dial their dynamic up to 11, providing a platform for arguments that let them both express deeper resentments through the subtext of the game. We'll come back to baseball's role on a more macro level throughout the video, but for now, I just want to appreciate how, even though I wish there were even more of the sport on display, A League of Their Own uses baseball to tell deeply intimate character stories, picking up on the mental challenges of the game and representing its intensive intimacy beautifully well. It's the perfect platform here for blending macro-level history with character-driven intensity. So let's turn to how those two ideas work in tandem through the character of Dottie Hinson.
Well, we got as far as Yellowstone Park and turned back. I was fine until that scout walked into our barn. Besides, I'm no quitter.
So baseball serves as the perfect basis for storytelling in A League of Their Own, and there are actually two levels to that baseball story. Now, while Kit and Jimmy each get their own spotlights to be sure, the film definitely firmly centralizes Dottie Hinson. The framed narrative introduces older Dottie, who, like her younger self, needs a real kick from a younger family member to get her out the house and back in touch with another side of herself, and once we're back in time, A League of Their Own follows the story scaffolding of the hero's journey pretty firmly with Dottie. So we start in the ordinary world, the dairy farm. Dottie gets a call to adventure from the recruiter. She initially refuses that call. That recruiter is the threshold guardian who takes her from the ordinary world to the extraordinary, and she slowly goes deeper and deeper through that extraordinary world, making friends, facing tests, getting more and more involved in this special new paradigm. She works with a mentor who encourages her to do so, and as Dottie quietly starts to prioritize the team over her sister Kit, the sisters come to a head until one particularly nasty fight pushes Dottie over the edge and they confront each other. When Kit gets transferred and not only blames Dottie, but also confronts Dottie with the truth that Dottie has stayed much longer than she said she would and seemingly can't resist the spotlight even when she pretends she doesn't want it, Dottie is left in emotional anguish. But it's here that she's rescued by her husband Bob, home from war, and everything Bob represents. Now, there's another version of this film out there where Dottie's marriage is a little more tenuous, and she and Jimmy have more of a romance. Thank God they cut that out. But in this version of the film, it's clear that Dottie and Bob have a lovely, pretty ideal relationship. It would have been very easy to make him more domineering or misogynist, but it's absolutely crucial that he be eminently supportive of who she is, and yet to her, this is a giant relief ticket back to the ordinary world. The comfortable, the planned, the easy, the routine. So they leave, but on their way out, her mentor, Jimmy, who in turn has been inspired to rediscover his love of the game by witnessing and encouraging hers, gives her one of the best confrontational speeches in sports film history.
It just got too hard.
It's supposed to be hard. If it wasn't hard, everyone would do it. The hard is what makes it great.
But what are they talking about here? What's too hard? Baseball, yes, and we can absolutely read and appreciate this scene as a meditation on the sport in and of itself, but it's more than that too, and it's why this film is so widely beloved. The speech clearly slow burn works on Dottie, who off-screen eventually turns around to make it back in time for the final game of the World Series. And there we have the famous showdown between Dottie and Kit. But we also gotta note that this is, of course, not Dottie reversing course to join the league permanently and embrace this side of herself. This is it. This is her last game. And from both the opening framing scene and her parting conversation with Kit after the game, we know she retreats into the same familiar, almost canned idea that baseball was only ever a game to her. So there's a tense contradiction at the heart of Dottie's character. Throughout the film, she steps up as a leader when Jimmy is a no-show. She basically saves the entire league when they need more snazzy press. She's the best player in the league, and she knows it and enjoys it. And yet, while the other players openly and proudly celebrate their new lives, she simultaneously holds baseball at arm's length, consistently repeating the refrain that she's just waiting for her husband to get back so they can raise kids out in Oregon, and that baseball is just a game to her, but we know that's not true. Now, most analysis of Dottie's character focuses on that never-ending debate over whether she intentionally drops the ball to let Kit score the winning run on what should have been an easy out. Most approaches to the film in general focus on the dynamic between those two sisters, and none of this is to say that A League of Their Own isn't about that or isn't about sisterhood. Of course it is, and of course that matters. But again, what were she and Jimmy talking about? Was it sisterhood? Was it Kit? I mean, what's the dramatic intent behind this character's decisions? It always has felt like something larger to me. Well, to answer that, we gotta look at the more macro-level lens this film employs as a consistent backdrop to the character stories. And that's not just the ever-present threat that the league will lose funding, it's the general cultural weight against which these girls are fighting. The film emphasizes juxtaposition between the grit, dirt, and blood that these female athletes throw themselves into and the ladylike composition that society demands of them. That's always a great opportunity for humor in the film, and these women sharing a new space together without the men in their lives is a beautiful example of found sisterhood and solidarity. It's one of my favorite parts of the film to enjoy. I always want more of those night bus rides, but this is an underdog story. And through both montages and harsh arguments between Walter Harvey and Ira Lowenstein, we're constantly aware that these women don't have to just uproot their lives and go through the physical strain of the game, but that they're also responsible for changing decades of gender norms and the prevailing social attitude. A League of Their Own is, of course, a PG Hollywood fairy tale, so in the world of the film, the climax of the World Series demonstrates the success of the league overwhelmingly. Sold-out games, electric crowds, Harvey himself signing off on another season for the Women's League. But as the latter half of the framed narrative makes clear, and as we all know just from existing in the real world, women's baseball didn't take off. In the year 2025, women's sports and female athletes are certainly getting more recognition and acclaim than in the 80s, but there is no women's baseball league on par with men's or anything like that. So ultimately, in the real-world story here, this fleetingly magnificent slice of history runs in precise parallel with that of Dottie's character. As Ira says in one of his arguments with Walter Harvey, once the men come back from war, society did basically tell women to get out of the factories and off the ballpark and back in the home. And for both the amazing women who played in the league and for the country at large, this short era became a sacred memory to celebrate in retrospect. So why did Dottie quit before the World Series? Why did she ultimately quit altogether? What was Jimmy talking about when he said it's supposed to be hard? What, besides baseball itself, is A League of Their Own actually about? To me, this film uses baseball in both the micro-level intricacies and the macro-level industry machinations as a reflection on change. Change on a personal level, as Dottie wrestles with how she's defined herself her whole life versus this new part of her that's finally really coming alive, and change on a greater social level, as the way things have been make way for the way things could be. This connection between Dottie and society at large is nodded to in a few other ways. First and foremost, through the contrast between Dottie and Kit, the older, more reserved sister, watching with a mixture, I think, of judgment and envy her younger, rasher, passionate sister live without worrying about what's expected from her. A dynamic rather similar to Eleanor and Marianne in Sense and Sensibility, actually. And in longer versions of this film, there are a few more scenes of Dottie warning Kit to stay away from All the Way May as a bad influence. In the film as it is, we do get a few nods to that conservative attitude from Dottie. But Dottie doubtless does have that same fire we see on display from Kit, and it's her pure talent, dedication, and competitive spirit that seems to really wake Jimmy up from his disinterest and inspire him, too, to change, to stop numbing himself through regret and actually throw himself into something new, something challenging, something meaningful, which is why he's the perfect person to deliver the lines that rattle Dottie as she and Bob drive cross-country. So, look, obviously, A League of Their Own is about many things. Baseball itself, sisterhood, womanhood, friendship, competition, but if you, like me, have long considered Dottie somewhat of a puzzle, it might be helpful to see her actions from joining the league to quitting it as operating in dramatic tandem with the evolution of social values at large. And to return to that debate, why did Dottie drop the ball? Was it to let her sister have a moment of glory on purpose? Did she simply not want the win as much as Kit did? We can, and others have, pour through the hints earlier in the film, from older Dottie telling her elder grandson to let the younger one have a chance at basketball, to Dottie holding onto the ball at an earlier, very similar showdown. But, and I hate to give a sort of cop-out answer here, but really, Dottie drops this ball because the film dramatically requires it. Here, the old has to make way for the new, the older for the younger, and it almost doesn't matter if it's because Dottie decides Kit needs this win more than she does, or if Dottie just didn't have what it takes. If we see change as the prevailing theme of A League of Their Own, it almost doesn't make a difference. Change is hard, but it is the hard that makes change great in some ways. And again, who better to deliver that thematic punch of the film than Jimmy Dugan, who changes not only by recovering from alcoholism and reconnecting with himself, but also by changing his opinion on women in baseball, starting the film aggressively dismissive and ending it by choosing to continue coaching in the women's league despite an offer from the men's. Seen as an examination of just how hard change is, A League of Their Own is a masterful marriage of macro and micro level storytelling, with Dottie Hinson at the center of it all, demonstrating just how hard it is to listen to yourself and confront who you really may be.
Yeah, I miss putting on all this gear, catching a double header in 100-degree heat, pushing the bus through the mud, getting slammed into every other day by a base runner. Think I'm gonna miss that?
Yeah.
Looking at A League of Their Own in this light, recognizing baseball as a storytelling platform for a message about change and its difficulties and merits and limits, to me helps explain the incredibly bittersweet effect of the film. As the epilogue closing framed narrative features, particularly with the adult Stillwell saying his past mother Evelyn always said those years playing baseball were the best of her life, we know change doesn't come in sweeping overhauls that sets everyone free, and this too is evident as adult Dottie walks through the halls of what she had just once before settling into the life that was predetermined for her. Not a bad life by any means, by all accounts a happy and loving one, but perhaps a safe and easier choice. And of course, there's so much more to this film that we haven't reviewed here, but one thing we have to mention is how the film does employ the very lens it also criticizes. And that's really a byproduct of this being an early 90s American Hollywood film. So, of course, every woman on the team is gorgeous, even the ones the film points at and calls ugly over and over. They all have perfect hair and skin and makeup in every scene. And the character of Marla Hooch, initially introduced as someone who just loves to play no matter what, is given this happy ending where she leaves halfway through the season to get married because finally someone finds her okay to look at. What a miracle. The film heavily obfuscates the very real queer identities of some of the women who inspired these characters in real life. There's a quiet nod to the idea of segregation, but not much recognition of inequality here. And yeah, it's just one film, and one film can't represent every facet of this era's social history. That doesn't mean we can't recognize and even expect more from some of this film's faults, particularly given its socially progressive subject matter. Overall, however, A League of Their Own is a remarkably well-made, well-conceived film, managing to focus on one theme through one character, while also incorporating a wide range of ideas, moods, and evocations of history. Though it is perhaps unduly glossy at times, it's far from one note, and as evidenced by the decades-long debate over the simple matter of a dropped ball behind home plate, it's clear that this film does a fantastic job of using not just any sport, but the particularly cinematic game of baseball for the purposes of meaningful, memorable, and timeless storytelling. Let me know what you think of this interpretation of A League of Their Own and Dottie Hinson in the comments, and as always, thank you so very much for watching. If you haven't yet, please do subscribe to the channel, and if you're already a subscriber, thank you for sticking around. Thanks, guys.